Hi, I'm Shan Wu with a Under Color of Law hot take on what is going on with the Trump administration's attack on education. So not only are they trying to dismantle the Department of Education, but I want to talk specifically about what they're doing with universities. Right now, as this headline indicates, Columbia University seems to be one of the big targets. And what the administration is demanding of Columbia is a bunch of demands. For example, they have to ban masks. Who cares if there might be a pandemic, still got to ban masks. You must complete the disciplinary proceedings for some student protesters. I guess the Trump regime wants to choose which students that the university should discipline. They want the university to formalize a definition for anti-Semitism, reform its admissions process, and interestingly, they want it to put its Middle East, South Asian, and African Studies departments under an academic receivership, among other things. Now, I don't know what that means, an academic receivership, but you can bet that the Trump regime's definition of it means they get to oversee the course content there. Now, Columbia seems to be trying to go along with this. And why would that be? Well, the big leverage here are funding cuts. They've already cut hundreds of millions of federal funding for Columbia. And this is not just like student financial aid, although that's terrible for students. It's really in the form of cuts for research in particular. And the universities really depend on this research and the research funding. And the research funding is really, really important in terms of science, medical advances, and the like. So let's take a quick look at what's happening to some of these well-known top-tier universities. The Harvard Crimson wrote a message from their president, Alan Garber. He says they could not carry out their mission the way they do now without substantial federal research support, nor could we provide the benefits to the nation that we do now without that support. So that's Harvard. They have an enormous endowment, bigger than many countries' budgets. And of course, they can dip into that endowment if necessary. It's not a good business model for them to be taking from it, but it shows that relationship they have with the federal government and what the government's trying to do to them now. Next up, let's take a look at Johns Hopkins. Here, there's a particularly interesting aspect to it, which is these layoffs that are going to be caused by the federal funding cuts are going to amount to the biggest layoffs in the university's history. And it's not like the university is in trouble, right? It's just because of these cuts that this is happening. They're going to have 247 workers for the university, which is based in Baltimore, and an affiliated center are all going to lose their jobs, going to get cut. And across 44 countries, because Johns Hopkins has international programs, another close to 2,000 positions are going to get cut. It's going to affect the university's Bloomberg School of Public Health, its medical school as well. Nearly half the school's total revenue came from federally funded research, about $365 million from USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. In all, they are set to lose about $800 million in funding over several years from USAID, which, as we all know, the Trump regime is in the process of dismantling. I mean, there's been some pushback, some stoppage to that, but basically their aim is take that place apart, make it stop getting any of the money that Congress had already appropriated for it. Overall, there's been good reporting on the enormous impact this is going to have across the board, not just at Columbia, not just at Harvard, not just at Johns Hopkins. The Guardian points out that higher education institutions have already begun scaling back, or they're bracing for cuts. University of Pennsylvania has cut graduate admissions at its medical schools for the fall by 35%, and graduate students from all across the country are reporting that admissions acceptances are being rescinded. These are folks who've completed their undergrad. They're going on to graduate degree programs, a lot of them in STEM programs. MIT, Stanford, other institutions have all put in hiring freezes at this point. And The Guardian also reports that Brown and Johns Hopkins are warning of even more potential layoffs coming up. So we might ask, why? Why does the Trump regime want to do this? Well, they may want to make Americans uneducated. These elites, like Trump, I mean, say what you will about whether he's a smart or intelligent guy or not, but he got the benefit of an elite education. He started off at Fordham in New York, and then he went to the Wharton School of Business. Vice President Vance, of course, as we all know, got to go to Yale Law School. Probably sort of a blemish for them. Do they really want to deny others the same type of opportunity, the same type of education? Well, yes, they seem to. Let's listen to what J.D. Vance has to say about this.
What we want to do in this movement in this country, I think, are fundamentally dependent on going through a set of very hostile institutions, specifically the universities, which control the knowledge in our society, which control what we call truth and what we call falsity, that provides research that gives credibility to some of the most ridiculous ideas that exist in our country. And so I'm excited to close this conference with this particular set of remarks, because I think if any of us want to do the things that we want to do for our country and for the people who live in it, we have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country.
So Vance says that it's really important to attack hostile institutions like universities. Why are universities hostile institutions? Hostile to what? To education? I mean, I get the idea that they're saying, oh, there's curriculums we don't like. We don't like anything to do, let's say, with Asian studies, African American studies. Well, maybe they only want to study about white people, whatever that means. But what's the real reason behind all this? Because as many, many people have commented on this, the American higher education university system is the envy of the world. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to challenge Vance or Trump or anyone, Musk, to refute that notion that everywhere in the world, people want to come to the United States to study. It's a mark of great prestige for a reason, because these are world-class learning institutions that, using lots of international students and faculty, produce world-class research, world-class results. So why this type of hostility towards it? Well, some other historical reasons for it. The historian Ruth Ben-Ghiat has written on this, and I'm going to quote from one of the things she wrote, which is that authoritarians depend on turning campuses into sites of mistrust and fear. In Pinochet's Chile, universities became stages for show trials, with faculty prosecutors promoting denunciations of extremist colleagues, who, as a result, sometimes those colleagues were imprisoned and tortured. Foreign teachers, foreigners there, were seen as inherently untrustworthy in the higher educational system, and they were frequently jailed and then expelled from the country. So she writes that Trump's actions, this was a few years back, also mirror a long international tradition of how illiberal authoritarian rule has managed universities. Including the fascist years in Europe nearly a century ago to our times, right-wing leaders have accused universities of being incubators of left-wing ideologies and sought to mold the universities in the image of their own propaganda policy and policing aims. In China, there was something called the Cultural Revolution, which was different from the Chinese Communist Revolution, which took over the country. This was Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, mid-60s, which he basically unleashed as a form of political warfare. He was having some political difficulties, and he unleashed the Red Guards to help police the proper thought, meaning you had to follow the authoritarian leadership, follow Mao, who was a dictator, as to what he said. This had devastating results in China. The young people were basically turned out to go against their teachers, denounce each other, denounce their families, all in order to help Mao consolidate his power. The education system essentially became dismantled in favor of punishing people for their thoughts to conform. How did this work for actual people living there at the time? My parents' families were there then. My mom's parents' property was all destroyed. People came and just destroyed their belongings, threw them out on the streets. All of my uncles on my father's side went to jail. Every single one of them served time in jail, not for violent crimes, but because they were considered to be political. enemies. And they were all, interestingly, people with higher education degrees. They had doctorates, they had master's degrees, and that's a very common experience that happens in these other countries when you come down on the academic centers. For the Cultural Revolution, the long-term effects of that, actually about 1.5 million people were killed during the Cultural Revolution. Millions suffered imprisonment, like my uncles, seizure of their property, torture, general revolution. The short-term effect was brutal, but the long-term effect hurt China for decades. There's a saying there of it creating a generation of empty heads, meaning they had no education. They had just gone through political indoctrination, punishment, fear. Now, I want to end with these particular thoughts, which is, what is the role of education in authoritarian regimes? Answer, take a listen.
There are no liberal arts colleges in authoritarian countries. So if you're transitioning to authoritarianism, you have to target colleges and universities as well as education. As Vladimir Putin recently said, wars are won by teachers.
That really cuts to the heart of it. I mean, you're not going to have education in authoritarian regimes. They need to control how people think. They need to control what people say. So they don't want to train people to think for themselves. So this whole pretend charade that the Trump people say, we're going to get rid of anti-Semitism, we're going to end woke ideology, like Governor DeSantis likes to say, that's all a sham, right? Sure, there's a lot of racist hate behind it, misogyny, hate of LGBT rights, human rights factors they want to get rid of. That's certainly a motivator, and it's kind of a sweetener for their hateful followers. But really, for those who are thinking, the ones in power, it's a means to an end. And that end is authoritarianism, to control the people. So let's keep our eyes on that as we hear about all these different controversies over education, what kind of curriculum to have. That's what's really going on. So we'll keep an eye on that together. That's it for now. Thanks again for the replies and comments. I try to get to them and reply to them as much as I can, but it's always great to hear from you. Thanks.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.